think we're going to start the evening's program. So if we could have if I could have your attention, please. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Mitch Daniels as our dinner speaker. I actually met Mitch a long time ago when I wrote a piece on an op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal on OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, that recommended that OPIC be abolished. Those were the days when I was young and naive and actually thought that it was possible to abolish a government agency when it had outlived its usefulness, but I don't think that's, I've learned better since then. But in any event, it turned out that Mitch was on the board of OPIC, and he called me up and he invited me to lunch to talk about it. And I remember it was at the University Club because he told an amusing joke about the University Club. Well, since that time, of course, Mitch has amassed an even more impressive resume than he had before, including serving as head of the Hudson Institute, in senior executive positions at Eli Lilly, as director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Bush administration, for 2 terms as governor of Indiana, a period of great accomplishment for the state, and almost running for president. Many of us, including myself, were quite disappointed when he decided not to run. Mitch has now assumed the position of president of Purdue University, where he faces a whole new set of challenges that are shared with leaders of other major universities. And he is going to talk to us this evening about innovation in higher education, and then he's also agreed to take some questions. So it's an honor to present Governor Daniels.
I appreciated the opportunity to be with you, not just to see old friends like Tom, but now I discover so many other old friends in the room, and been a little bit of a homecoming. First person I saw when I was checking in, Peter Davidson, came across the lobby in his hiking togs and greeted me and warmly, and I said, Peter, how nice of you, it's been years and years, how nice of you to recognize me. Peter said, well, tell the truth, I'm not that good at faces, but I never forget a suit. I get a lot of invitations, and I've got a day job now that's pretty busy, and so I can't take them all, but I was really eager to do this when I had a sense of the nature of the audience, and then the topic that Tom suggested just was one that interests me and is very, very relevant to things I'm trying to do. And so next thing I knew, I found myself saying yes, and I appreciate your hospitality and making that possible. Life did change for me in a way I never expected, but that's been typical, I guess, most of my time, my adult working days. And I found myself in higher education. This was a surprise also to some of my friends. A friend of mine in New York City, he's married to a really very well-known and sophisticated woman. He said he went home the day that the announcement was, the university made the announcement. He said, did you hear what Mitch is going to do next? She said, no. He said, well, he's going to be president of Purdue. She said, that is just terrible. He said, well, no, I think it's kind of cool. What's the matter with it? She said, his talents will be totally wasted in the chicken business. So I'm going to assume, given the nature of the audience and all the business, many of you are in, you know exactly who we are, and you'll hear a commercial for our students and the nature of our research and our commitment to transferring technology, perhaps into some of your businesses before I'm done here, but I hope you didn't mistake my new assignment the way she did. Tom's invitation said a lot about Joseph Schumpeter, And one reason I was glad for this opportunity was it sent me back to do a little rereading. Like Thomas McCraw's classic biography of Schumpeter, I thumbed back through. Once again, saw those memorable lines, so relevant to the world in which you live and which you innovate, that said things like, stabilized capitalism is a contradiction in terms. It just cannot be. Capitalism by its nature is ever-changing, ever-dynamic. Schumpeter, of course, was one of the first to teach that the change that it brings is not smooth and incremental. It tends to be sudden and tumultuous and as discontinuous, as we like to say these days, disruptive. I know I'm in a room of some disruptors, but today's disruptor is tomorrow's disruptee, and some of you may have been on both ends of that process. It is, of course, what he termed creative destruction, the creative destruction of a free system that drives progress and has made of this country and other countries that have allowed freedom to happen. Someone once wrote that capitalism just happens. It's socialism that has to, in its ilk, that have to be imposed. So those societies which have allowed freedom to operate have been those that had the most material success. And I think that in many ways, the decades since he began producing his work 70, 80 years ago have just validated over and over the wisdom of what he said. But he didn't have the last word. And we see in our time not just the operation of creative destruction, but also those forces which arise in advanced societies to impede it. There was a scholar named Mansur Olson, with whom some of you may be familiar, taught for many years and wrote out at the University of Maryland, and wrote a book that just made a big impression on me 30, 40 years ago now, called The Rise and Decline of Nations. But Olson was one of the first to identify that as societies advance materially, they build up vested interests, we would say today maybe special interests. He called them coalitions, which come into being to protect what is. They usually get government on their side in doing this. And they organize really to suppress and hold back the natural forces of capitalism, creative destruction, and so forth. And that societies that after some point sort of ossify and calcify in these coalitions and manage to stifle at least some of the competition that would otherwise disrupt and displace them. Well, it's not hard to look around us and spot examples of that. Dodd-Frank, Sarbanes-Oxley, I mean, maybe well-intentioned, maybe responding to some real problems, but the effect is to advantage the big at the expense of the small. I talk to mid-sized banks in my state these days who tell me, and they're not exaggerating for effect, they now have more compliance officers than loan officers. I know and you will too, all sorts of people with small emergent businesses who either will never go public or will postpone and hesitate because the transaction costs, the compliance costs, the risks of doing it have been made so large. And we may lose a lot of great businesses and a lot of great jobs that could have happened because they never accessed the capital that their businesses imagine. I won't talk about the health care bill tonight, but again, all around you, you see its punitive effects on small businesses and those who might have hoped to work for them. Schumpeter also said that capitalism underwrites a class of hostile intellectuals, people of no practical experience, and he said who've never had any experience managing anything. Working at a large university, I don't really know what he's talking about. But he said it, so there may be some truth in it. Now, in this room, there are folks who will have a lot more informed view than I do, but these days one reads articles on both sides. There's a lot of data both ways. Is innovation slowing down just at the time we need it most? I mean, let's face it, this economy is still struggling. It's the weakest recovery ever from a depression or recession this deep, and we're certainly hoping and counting on new goods, new services, new breakthroughs, new improvements to lift us out of it. Not clear. I'll just mention, however, one huge plus that has happened. Unlike most, or at least the most memorable innovations of the last couple, 3 decades, which you and your enterprises and your research have given rise to, I'm talking about information technology and so forth, this is a little more mundane, but as far as I'm concerned, the biggest break that the American economy, probably the world economy, has gotten in 15 or 20 years is the incredible advances in energy extraction. That pocket protector types, you know, who probably went to Purdue University and places like it have figured out. And it's a long way from Silicon Valley, but oh my gosh, the possibilities here. What affordable energy, abundant, homegrown energy that we don't pay hostile nations for can mean to this country if we enable and let it is remarkable. Everybody worried about middle-class jobs, and you ought to be, should be rooting for the frackers and taking obstacles out of their paths, but as Olson would have predicted, and as Schumpeter's hostile class could be counted on to say, in the midst of, right in the middle of this potential huge windfall, this discontinuous positive change, there are people trying to stifle it. I hope they don't. Now, when we come to the topic of creative destruction and the job I now find myself in, I think the reason Tom asked me here was to talk a little about what does that mean in the specific context of higher education in America. And it's a pretty interesting topic. I approach it with mixed feelings. On the one hand, Alan Simpson used to say, mixed feelings are what a father experiences when his daughter comes home from a date with a Gideon Bible under her arm. Do you need a moment more on that one? Mixed feelings because that process of competition driving constant improvement and making new opportunities available, new possibilities available, is something that I hope we never lose, and I hope we never allow to become stifled by the forces of stasis and the status quo. But on the other hand, I'm right in the middle, where I sit now, I'm right in the middle of the bullseye, because a lot of people think that this process of creative destruction is going to visit itself on higher education more dramatically than almost any other sector. Schumpeter wrote that the system of capitalism can never be stationary. Well, what is more stationary than higher education? It hasn't changed in 1,000 years. And, stationary, it's more like fossilized. So the analogies are everywhere, and you're reading them all the time. You know, why isn't higher ed going to be the next record industry or the next set of video stores? Newspapers is the most persuasive, I think, analogy. They're in the content business, the information delivery business, and suddenly there are better, cheaper, more direct ways, intermediating, as we say, ways to do it. I mean, when the Boston Globe and the Washington Post sell within, 10 days or something of each other, for a combined total of $340 million, when one of them sold not long ago for 4x that, you're seeing creative destruction in its most graphic form. And there are a lot of reasons to think that higher ed's next. I was part of promoting and sponsoring one of, I think, the most effective and absolutely valuable disruptors in higher ed. Some of you will know about it. WGU, Western Governors University. It's online. They say competency-based. You progress at your own rate. When you and your mentor decide you're ready to take the test, you take it. You don't have to sit till the end of a semester. So you can move as fast as you're able, therefore more cheaply. And we brought them to Indiana, which for the last couple, 3 years has supplied about a third of all their new entrants nationally. It was a sort of a private labeling exercise that it's worked beautifully. It's a great, great opportunity for people who, single moms, people in their 30s and 40s, or just young people without the money to go to a residential college. Some of you will have read about what may be a major inflection point. There's a whole lot of been going on in the world of online education, but Georgia Tech has now said they're going to offer a master's at a fraction of the cost that has typically run people, and with credit starting in January, we'll see. A man named Clayton Christensen, that name familiar to you? He's pretty much the big name these days, now up at Harvard, and he is today's Schumpeter in a way. He's the analyst, the number one analyst of disruptive technologies and new business models. When he says you're doomed, you better pay attention. That's what he's saying about higher ed. He's written that he'll be surprised if in 10 years hundreds of colleges and universities aren't bankrupt. And for all I know, he might be right. It may be apocryphal, but a professor friend of mine says he was there. He says Larry Ellingson went to some big meeting of the faculty, university faculty. This would be probably 2-3 years ago now. And marched out very dramatically on the stage, said, the first thing I want to say is the biggest issue in higher ed is we're not paying the faculty enough money. Yay. He says, no, I mean a lot more money. Yay. The best professors in America ought to be paid at least $1 million a year. They're tearing the walls down. He says, now, I'm only going to need about 100 of you. Less applause for that line. I was saying to somebody in the fellowship hour outside, I mean, just to concentrate the mind, when we got some of our deans together and talked about some things we're going to try to do at our university soon, we floated 2 or 3 troublesome, to say the least, scenarios past them. One of them, you guys may be the authors of. This is not implausible. What if we woke up let's say early next year, and 10 or 20 of the biggest companies, biggest employers in America said, look, we've had it. We can't sort one college from another. We've got graduates who aren't really ready to work. Everybody's getting A's. We don't know what it means. We've been using the diploma as a surrogate, really, for the brains to get in the first place, and maybe a little bit of purpose. But there's got to be a better way, so we're just interested from now on in competency. We've commissioned some exams. You pass the exam. We don't care if you went to college or not. You can prove you're good at what we want, we'll hire you. There would be a wake-up call. Christensen says that an aging industry or an aging enterprise, and he says this very specifically about higher ed, cannot reform itself from within. He said the best they can try to do is set up something parallel that's completely new and different. Don't even try to do it from within. It's just too slow. There's just too much inertia in the system. Will not happen. You know, who am I to argue? I mean, people have tried that other method, by the way. I'm thinking about Saturn, if you remember them. It was a bold attempt by GM to do the same thing. You know, it sent me back another great, great book you all have read, but I hadn't looked at it in a long time. David Halberstam's book, The Reckoning, about the auto industry. Another invincible, nothing can ever change set of institutions, right, that suddenly got undone. And there's a lot of great insights and lines in that book. The one I remember and I love best, well, the one I love best was about the first guy who came over from Honda, and the Japanese, and the first American word he mastered was suitcase. And they said, what? And he said, because all they ever tell me is about the suit and the case. The suit. He hated our legal system, right? And every meeting there was a suit and a case. But the insightful line one of many. He said that in that instance, business and labor spent decades just talking to each other. And when they finally opened the door to the waiting room to see what the customers thought, they were gone. And this is not too different from what Christensen and others see happening in higher ed today. Now, in my business years, I came to believe, and I learned the hard way, that forecasts and predictions and senses of trends and so forth quite often will overestimate the effect in the near term, but underestimate the effect in the long term. I mean, I'll give you an embarrassing example. In '90, I got appointed to run the North American business, which was 2/3 of the whole business for the corporation that I was serving at the time. Thought I always would, by the way. And so I'm thinking, well, all right, I'm a visionary, right? We gotta think this. Put you in a job like this, you got to think big. So within my first week on the job, I got one of our brightest young associates, and I said, now look, everybody knows Castro's going to go, and Cuba's going to be a really good market, and we don't want to get left at the starting block. So I want you to prepare a plan so that we can go bang the minute Cuba opens. This is, it was 1993. Still waiting. So it is absolutely, I hope they still got it somewhere. It was a pretty good plan. So I don't pretend to know for certain. And of course, it's possible to overestimate these things. But let me just say a few things, and then we'll take some questions about higher ed. Odds are, I'm looking at a room full of college graduates. And let me just say that one way or another, life at your alma mater and others is going to be very different soon if it isn't already. The term which floats around, so to speak, in higher ed circles these days is tsunami. The president of Stanford used it, and everybody seized on it. He's projecting a tsunami. I said to the folks at our university, I said, well, when you get a prediction like that, I can think of three options, three potential responses. One is nonsense. There's not going to be any tsunami. Second is, yeah, there may be one, but it's not coming here. The third is, just might happen, so why don't we get ready in case, which is certainly the approach we're taking at Purdue. Let me just give you from our perspective just a few things that we intend to do. First of all, we intend, as any good marketer would, to differentiate every way we possibly can. Here's my favorite marketing story. Years ago, I went to a fish fry in Mishawaka, Indiana. I was a first-time candidate. I'm trying to get people to, know who the hell I am, I'm meeting everybody I can. I'm going through a Methodist church fish fry, and there's an older guy next to me. He says, better not eat too much. I got a game this afternoon. I said, game? What kind of game you got? He said, softball, 16 over softball. We got a 6-team league. We play all summer. I said, good for you. What a great example. I said, this league, how's it work? I said, do businesses get involved, like Little League? He said, exactly. Every team is sponsored by a different funeral home. Purdue is already differentiated. We are, as they say these days, a STEM. We say STEAM because agriculture is another high-tech discipline, and we're good at it. But, a STEM university, heavily invested in producing more engineers than all but a few other schools. We produce more STEM graduates, actually, than any other university. And so one thing we will certainly do, because America and our state need people with great technical skills. I know some of the businesses in this room prize them. We're going to move even more heavily that direction. As we do so, we're going to apply what I sometimes think of as the pajamas test. The real stay up at night issue for people with a job like mine is, why in a few years would somebody spend a lot of money, pick up from where they are, and move somewhere and move in for 4 or 5 years or more to get an education that might be on offer somewhere else in a different way, online or some other way? What is it? What value are we going to add? I think there are answers. You know, I always say pajamas means, what are we going to do that you can't acquire sitting at home in your pajamas? Part of it will be the relevance I talked about. Teach things that unquestionably are needed in society and by the employers in society. Teach them in new and perhaps superior ways. We believe we are well out front. We are transforming courses, and I doubled the rate at which we're doing it, faster than any school we can find. You know, when you went to school, the formula, you probably remember, was 2 lectures in a lab or 2 lectures in maybe a discussion course, depending what you studied. That is fading away at Purdue University. Now, the students will watch a lecture, which is probably has interactive questions to see if they're learning anything. Faculty members getting this data in real time. They can watch it 10 times if they want, watch it stop, watch it some more, watch it when they want to. When they go somewhere, it's going to be for exercises or discussions of what they may not have gotten. Students like it more. We've tested this clinical trial fashion side by side with the traditional method, and it does work better. We're going to emphasize rigor. Those schools which have participated, and it's most of them, probably your alma mater, in the inflation, the phenomenon known as grade inflation. We don't. Average grade at Purdue is still about 2.8. It's hard to get a good grade. I tell the freshmen, I've told them that their first night the other night, I said, if you didn't know you came to a tough school, congratulations. You get out of here with a good grade, people will know, people, the great telecom companies or others of this world will know that you learned something. We believe they're going to have, higher ed's going to have a lot more accountability, and you have to measure it the way you do in all your businesses. We have groups working right now on how we will measure, first of all, the growth of students. I mean, the caliber of students coming to our school and many schools is going up and up and up. A friend of mine used to say, you know, there's certain experiments I can design that are doomed to succeed. Well, it isn't enough if you have an elite student body that they do well. They were going to. The question is, how much did they grow? How much did whatever you're doing help them? And can you prove it? I think you and your organizations are going to demand that people where I am prove it. And we're working on that. And likewise, better measurements of how our graduates succeed later on. And we'll stake ourselves to those. I'm not looking for a merit badge, but when I got this job, I asked for a contract which was different than any we could find in higher ed. First of all, we trimmed the president's salary and potential salary instead of, you know, that ratchet thing, let's go to the 80th percentile and so forth. But more important, 30% of what I might make is at risk. If I don't get straight A's, I'll get paid less. And I hope we can propagate that elsewhere in the academy so that what's common where you live becomes common where I live, and that people associate the caliber, the provable caliber of their work with the rewards they get. And finally, we're going to opt for a different approach to the affordability. Now, we're a land grant school, and you know what those are. And we take it as a very fundamental, non-changing part of our assignment that a student from anywhere, from any income level, who can meet our standards can afford to come to our school. We froze tuition this year. Arbitrarily, I did it. For the first time in 37 years at Purdue. I cut the price of food 5% because I could pretty much tell they could. And we got that done. It'll be frozen for 2 years, by the way. And it wasn't that hard to do. I have to see how much further we can get. But the game in higher ed has been a sticker price game. You've had, many of you are at the point where you've sent children to schools. You've seen it. The idea was you just raise the price, and people have inferred that it costs more, it must be worth more. Someone outside talked about the Tiffany effect. Well, I think that thing's run its course. And at Purdue, we're gonna talk about value, the quality of the learning that happens divided by the cost. We want to stretch that equation at both ends. I think that's going to be the new term of competition. Now, so we do all that. I think if Mr. Christensen were here, he'd say, nice try, bud, not going to avail anything. You know, it's just not going to be nearly enough. You can't do this from the inside. And you're going to be washed away by the technology, many of you are involved in these things, and by a marketplace which decides that these diplomas really aren't trustworthy enough. There's got to be a better way. Who am I to say he's not right? Schumpeter, after all, was a pessimist. He thought that the system, which he wrote so eloquently about, would ultimately fail, would fall to statism. And so far, at least, he's wrong. So I opt not to be a pessimist. I do believe our great universities are enormous assets for this country, not merely in raising the human talent level, which a successful society, especially these days, must have, but in ways I didn't come here to talk about tonight. Researching and developing the new technologies, and then finding better ways than we've had before to turn them over to those who can bring them to millions in the marketplace. We've turned Purdue upside down the last 6 or 7 months. You're not going to find a more partner-friendly, transfer-friendly university than ours. So I believe that our universities are worth changing because they are worth saving. They remain in a world in which we have lost some of our edge, right? We have lost some of our competitive advantages as a nation. This is one realm in which we remain number one. And I think it's worth all our efforts and all the change we might have to bring from within and all the pressure you might have to bring and support you might have to bring from the outside to see that America's universities, especially its research universities, remain unparalleled in the world. Thanks for having me. I'd like to take a few questions. I can probably hear it if just speak them up. Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
So I'm curious whether you've done any thinking about taking your engineering programming and integrating it into like the petroleum industry and getting maybe like the Cornell School does with hotel management, actually getting closer to industry and let them pay, but also then turning out students that actually are more, in line with what they want, and then international. I think one of the things we do better than anybody is create original thinkers. Have you thought at all about taking Purdue offshore into the global environment and generating revenue that way?
2 great questions. Actually, long for me, Purdue has a very strong tradition of what we call co-op education. Most of our engineers do work during the time they're there. A lot of them take an extra year because of that. We're not particularly deep in petroleum specifically, but across the rest of engineering, it is almost certain if you hire a Purdue engineer that she or he will have had at least one and probably more than one work experience while they are in school. Incidentally, they are certain to have had a research experience working in a team. And this is very, industries say, yes, that's the sort of work that we want our new employees to be good at. We are almost the most international campus in America. 1 in 6 of our undergraduates is international, 1 in 10 is Chinese. We have more Chinese students on our campus tonight than any school does. And so I'm a huge believer that we'd like to educate and keep more, having educated them, we'd like to keep more of them. But this too is proof, I think, of how highly valued the American system is, that, at least for now, brilliant young people from elsewhere would rather come here than stay home or go somewhere else.
I'd like to go to the point you raised about employer credentialing of skills in the
Right.
employment process. While I'm not aware of actual cases of this, I think if you looked at some of your departments closely, you would see a very positive synergy between credential testing outside the university and your university programs. I suggest you look at your engineering program, and the one I'm most familiar with is accounting, where in accounting, an accounting program prepares a student to be credentialed by an outside testing body, and they are tested very well and very well credentialed. And I think my vision is that actually enhances the academic program, and that the university can benefit from having either external or employer credentialing of student skills.
Right, and it may well be coming, I happen to agree with you, but whether one likes it or not, I don't see any reason to disbelieve that this might well be a coming trend. It's not that hard to do. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with some of the testing service people recently. You know, it wouldn't be hard for them to fashion counterparts to the CPA exam and others we could name. And then the currency of higher ed might be what percentage of our students pass it on the first try. You know, there's an entrepreneur friend of mine back home who's about to unveil, I mean, there's a new one every week, so I don't know that his will at all stand out, but it's an interesting theory. He's about to start, he's going to call it Apprentice U. And the theory is that he'll enroll students very inexpensively. They'll take a few so-called foundational basic courses, but the basic curriculum, he's lined up businesses who are going to take these students for, I think it's 6 or 8 week internships at a time. It's a little bit back to your question. They will grade the student, supply that back to Apprentice U. They will be both, in a sense, the faculty, whoever supervises the intern, and the part of the whole apparatus, and he plans to give a warranty to the students. If you don't get a job within the first X months after you leave, we'll give you your tuition back. The whole thing's going to take like 18 months or 24 months or something like that. Might just work. What if a host of enterprises like that start blossoming? There's one.
Thanks. So from Airbnb to Uber to any number of disruptive incumbents, the thing that always protects them from competition, from disruption, and can forestall it for a very long time is barriers to entry that the government erects. So in the case of higher education, accreditation is the ultimate barrier. Accreditation is monopolized by state governments. Federal loan eligibility depends on accreditation.
Right.
The reputation market for that credential that's given in a diploma depends on accreditation. Why should that be monopolized by the states? Why not break that up? Why not open it up to competition? And in particular, family friend of mine, Lou Pearlman, in 1993, wrote a book called Schools Out about the future of higher education. Which
We used to work together.
There you go.
He wrote it while we were working together. I know.
And he predicted, exactly what was going to happen in higher education. It took longer than he expected.
Right.
And his ultimate comment on this is that the impulse that you and other folks had with starting Western Governors University was exactly right. You got the vision, but the change that was needed to really unleash competition at the time wasn't simply starting a model that was like the universities of the day, like Western Governors University, as great as that may have been, but it was breaking that monopoly, opening up the market to competition so that today's e-learning companies could be not just working with universities, but competing directly with them and forcing you to deliver value on the terms that consumers and parents really want. So, one, why should the accreditation be monopolized by the states? And two, if you had to do it over again, would you have gone further than Western Governors University back in the early 90s?
Well, first of all, accreditation is not, I don't think of it as a state-run cartel arrangement. I mean, these things sit outside, right? They're regional and they're national in scope, but everything else you say about them is, I think, valid. And, I haven't sat through one of these yet, but I've now listened to people who have, and it's a very valid, I think, critique that either we don't need them at all, or they're evaluating people on the wrong thing. How much did you spend on this? How many people? It's all inputs, right? It's everything except what counts. What did the students learn, and how well did they do with whatever it was they did learn? And I think that game's on very thin ice. You talk to Arnie Duncan about it, he doesn't. And I have, and he doesn't see. And if the federal government, you want to talk about a disruptive change that government could actually bring about, if the federal government announced tomorrow that student loans are no longer dependent on this, the world goes upside down. And, I don't know whether it might be a net plus. I think that the market at this point is going to start sorting out who's providing a really good education from those who aren't, without regard to what some supervening body, whatever imprimatur they put on it.
Well, I've got the mic, so.
Yeah.
And I hope it's an authorized wireless mic. I work for the FCC. I guess my question is about when people think about disruption in education. A lot of the talk is about internet-enabled, network-enabled models where Khan Academies, kind of that kind of thing, where it's sort of if people are sort of thinking of education as a content delivery system. I think students absorb content, and networks are very good at transmitting content both ways, and so therefore it's a lot cheaper. But when I look back on my own college and grad school experiences, so much of it was not about the content. So much was about the people I was with. The social skills. I learned a lot of the group interactions. You mentioned some team building things that happen. And so I guess my question is, to what extent do you think, the physical, the place, the proximity that's inherent in some of our big universities is a competitive advantage, maybe? And I guess I'll ask an FCC-related question. Do you see an unbundling of that over time? Where people, you might have communities where people live together and they get their content from somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe. But I think there's a lot to what you say, and it's another reason that so as I read every article that I spot about MOOCs and so forth. And so 3 years ago it was tsunami, and it's just a matter of time, and it's all going to be washed away. And then marketplace experience, that thing, the stories have now moved around to the not so fast sense. A lot of these things aren't proving out well, and let's just say it's at a minimum it's early days for all that. And there's a lot in what you say. I mean, something I didn't talk about here, but it's all the rage in higher ed, and you'll know a lot about it. But higher ed hasn't done nearly what it could to gather information about what students are learning and how they're learning it. And we're going to invest heavily in this. Learning analytics is the term of art that people are using. The idea is, and by the way, the lead technology in this whole area, the first one out there was devised at Purdue University. It's called Signals. And what it does is identifies those markers of student success or struggle, identifies the students early on while there's still time who appear to be struggling or who are likely to, and then you try to fashion the right sort of intervention to help those students. It's you may have gone to a school like this. Legend has it that at our university, not that many, a generation or two ago, people swear they'd go in and sit down, and the first day the professor would say, "Look to your left and right, one of you won't be here in a semester or two. We're going to wash you out." And we're now on the absolute other side of that. The whole idea is to help the students succeed. And there may be things that can be done and can be done better in that setting, in the residential setting, or something more like the traditional setting. That may be another differentiator, another answer to my pajamas question.
Charles Murray wrote a book, Coming Apart, recently, in which he reaches the very depressing diagnosis that the haves and the have-nots are increasingly separating because of the chasm of cognitive ability, and that it's inevitable that because our society has become so good at locating, identifying, nurturing those with greater cognitive capabilities, and then they segregate with each other, and that the haves have not only more resources, but better ethical and social virtues as well. What do you think about that phenomenon, and do you see there's a role for higher education in trying to address that?
Like everything Charles writes, it's deeply grounded in data, and it's impossible to quarrel with the fundamentals that he's talking about. And look at this room. You know, what he says is, and by the way, the book's just about white America. He was very astute, didn't buy himself any trouble or any noise in there. He just looked at white America, and if you haven't read it, it says just what Alan just summarized, that increasingly people like us go to certain schools, marry people like themselves, and you're getting this big bimodal distribution in the population around cognitive ability and the, as you said, social skills, the ethics that tend to correlate to economic success. I don't know how you argue with the data he's got. So that takes you to the question, what are we going to do about it? That's an unacceptable outcome in a society that is nothing if it's not, if it doesn't hold the promise of upward mobility. And that's where I think a school like ours comes in. That's why I'm fixed on the idea of being more affordable, let everybody else charge the stratospheric tuitions till they can't anymore. What are we going to do to make certain that students who come to Purdue can succeed there? And that still leaves the problem of those who, it's hard to find the students we really want. You know how many students in Indiana is a state of 6.5 million people. This is a data point I don't talk about much. 6.5 million people. So we got about 1.1 million or something like that students in K-12. You know how many African American students in the state were at our mean SAT? 70. I'll just leave it at that.
So Nigel Cameron, I now direct the Center for Policy on Emerging Technologies in Washington, D.C. Spent many years of my life in academic administration. You have once or twice used the four-letter word MOOC. I'm a little interested and surprised this has not been a bigger element in your presentation this evening about the tsunami, because that, of course, is the tsunami, if you like, the tsunami in the room. Plainly, Clay Christensen, I think, was talking about 90% of US colleges being defunct in 10 years' time. Huge projections here. Be delighted to hear your comments on the extent to which your university is actually seeking to anticipate and to shape the way that we move into the MOOC culture. I'm all for elitism and the schools that can attract people and will survive. Plainly, for economic reasons, there are fundamental arguments why globally MOOCs will triumph. Now we have Georgia Tech offering the first, I think, complete degree program, graduate program via MOOC. Huge news recently. How is this traumatizing your school, and what are your plans, sir?
Yeah, well, I didn't use the term till the end, but that's exactly what I was talking about when I talked about people in their pajamas and tsunamis and all. That's exactly what people are saying, and I can't say. I said I can't say that this won't be the mode of higher education in the future. I do think, however, that there is value to be added that is, at least so far, no one has found a way to do in a purely online environment. I mean, first of all, We offer online courses. A huge fraction of the summer credits that our students got this year, which went up, were online. We're going to move as fast as we can in that direction. You can take online courses even if you're a resident at our West Lafayette campus. But it is not at all clear that our pajama-clad MOOC attender can match a Purdue engineer who has had multiple lab experiences, co-op working experiences, has lived in what we call a learning community as early as their first week of school, where they are with all in the residence halls, 40, 50 people studying the same discipline they are and helping each other to learn it in a face-to-face, one-on-one way. So I freely confess, don't know. Christensen may be right. Maybe not possible to reform from within. But I think there is reason to suspect that one can blend the new technologies with the unquestionable advantages. I mean, why would anybody go anymore and sit in a lecture hall with 400 people, try to capture it all? If you could watch the same thing, actually the best one the instructor ever gave, broken into 15-minute modules where they can stop and ask a few questions to test for understanding, where you can watch it backwards and forwards and 5 times if you need. Of course we should do things that way, and we're moving as fast as we can. That may leave room for learning, as I say, that is hard to do in a remote individual setting. So thanks for, it's a good question. Love the name, by the way. Name my dog Nigel. Anybody else? One more?
70 years ago, Schumpeter asked the question, can capitalism survive? He thought it couldn't, but as you pointed out, it has indeed survived. Do you think capitalism can make it another 70 years? And what is the role of business in ensuring that it does?
I do. I think its advantages, no matter how hard its enemies, and sometimes people who claim to be its friends, try to suppress it. Again, I think it erupts. I mean, look at China. You know, this is not a communist surge that we've seen in the economy of that nation. You've all been there and seen it for yourselves. So yes, I think it can be, but that doesn't mean it'll survive in the countries where it's, or that it'll be led by the countries that are dominant now. Olson had a lot, I think he's right about a lot of things. You know, for human reasons, the haves tend to set up barriers to entry, tend to set up protections against the competition they fear. And sometimes they're pretty darn good at it. Europe's dying because of it. And we might follow them. But somewhere, you know, freedom and the material progress it brings is going to flourish, I believe, because it's a universal aspiration of people to do better. And we got a lot of hungry people in this world who deserve to do a lot better than they're doing now. I hope this nation decides to lead them, support them, give them a positive example, but it's not clear what choices we'll make. You know, Olson's most interesting insight was that the fastest growth rates happen after cataclysm, war, natural disaster, or something that wipes out all these encrusted special interests. And then the new sprouts of dynamic capitalism grow up very rapidly. Think post-war Japan, Germany, and so forth. So, you know, I hope and I cling to the confidence that our nation, you know, still has enough of this, that will tackle the problems Murray has so sadly pointed out. But, you know, history says that leading nations don't lead forever. I just predict that those who do lead over time will be those who allow human potential to go where it will and reach its full opportunities. Thanks for having me.